So Nick, what's the plan for today?
We're gonna make some people smile.
So I'm making a video on smiling. So the first question that I want to ask you guys is, what makes you smile?
Them.
Yeah, traveling with my friends.
Traveling
Yeah.
with friends.
Music.
Yeah, music. Okay.
Probably the same thing. We all traveled here. They're from the Netherlands. I'm from America. We
That's
all
so sick. That's so sick. When did you guys get here?
Yesterday.
No way. Well, welcome to Toronto. And what about you?
Yeah, music.
Okay. So the second question I want to ask is, do you think you guys can tell a fake smile from a real smile? Do you think you can tell one apart?
I do, but some people can fake it really well. Yeah.
It's in the eyes.
It's in the eyes. Okay, that was going to be the next question.
Hey everyone, welcome to Synapes. My name is Nick. If this is your first time here, which it probably is, this is my first video, welcome. This is a channel dedicated to you and to me and to understanding how we as apes go about the world, making sense of it, thinking, feeling, through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, and philosophy. A little bit of everything. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that is near and dear to both my heart and face, and I hope you are well acquainted with it as well. But today we're going to be talking about smiling. Stick around and you will find out how to spot a real versus a fake smile. We're going to talk a little bit about how people study smile and facial expressions in psychology and evolutionary biology. And the last section, we'll talk a little bit about the facial feedback hypothesis, how your face actually can change the way you think and perceive the world. So stick around, grab a banana, have some fun. Oh, I absolutely destroyed that. All right, first thing first. Okay, let's talk about what a smile really is. Studying smiles has been in the realm of psychologists for about just over a century. We see the first studying this when French anatomist G.B. Duchenne, right here, really studied the differences between a real and a fake smile by noting that certain activation of muscles around the eyes, which we'll see here, called the orbicularis oculi, those muscles were only activated during real smiles of felt enjoyment. Later, psychologists Ekman and Friesen in the late 1900s categorized smiles into three different types. We got felt smiles, false smiles, and miserable smiles, each with their own distinct facial muscle activation pattern and associated feelings. So felt smiles, which were later actually called Duchenne smiles in honor of the French anatomist G.B. Duchenne, felt smiles are characterized by one, positive affect, which is just a fancy term for good feelings, activation in both the zygomaticus muscles here in the cheeks, which you'll see up here, and the orbicularis oculi muscles, like Duchenne pointed out in the late 1800s, often creating what you have little crow's feet, which are little lines of skin under here when you smile. So false and miserable smiles, on the other hand, are smiles that there are no genuine positive affect feelings. And so we can distinguish those because even though we may have the zygomaticus major muscle activation here, we don't get to the same activation of the orbicularis oculi muscles around. And so when you're looking for fake smiles, the tell is really in the eyes, which we can see some of the people I interviewed today got that spot on. So even though we have similar muscle pattern activation in false smiles and miserable smiles, these two are really context dependent. And so when you think of a false smile, we think of people smiling in order to try and convince someone else that they are feeling positive affect. And a miserable smile, on the other hand, is one that you might feel yourself do when you see someone scrape their knee, or when you see an accident of any sort. You have the similar activation in facial muscles, but the emotions and the feeling going through your head are actually significantly different. And we'll get different neurobiological mechanisms going on in play and different parts of the brain lighting up. Here is a fancy little table that I whipped up for you. All right, to kind of set a theme for this channel, I really want to talk about some of the evolutionary biology behind smiling, so we can learn a little bit more about why these mechanisms actually still exist in humans today. On a side note, I've been reading Sapiens. It's a super easy read, but a phenomenal book if anyone is kind of just getting into human history and evolutionary biology. Great book, easy read. So to properly understand why we smile, we kind of have to go beyond the realm of neuroscience and psychology, and we can dabble our toes a little bit in anthropology and, again, evolutionary biology. So one of the things that's really interesting about facial expression is that there are consistent features across different cultures and across different species. However, we do get significant cultural variation, where someone across the world or at a different point in history might be able to understand and promote different facial expressions differently than we do now. So usually when people are studying facial expression, we can kind of divide things into two categories. We have universal evolutionary adaptation, which are things that are specific throughout the entire Homo sapiens species, so all of humans. And we also have cultural specific social adaptations. And so these social adaptations might be things that overlap a little bit between cultures, but they're not rooted in our genotypes in the same way that universal evolutionary adaptations are. And so we can have these cross-cultural differences, but they are almost purely social. And while I'm sure there are significant differences actually that we would be able to see in neuroimaging studies of how different emotional areas and even muscular areas function cross-culturally, this is still largely in the domain of psychology, which we look at things at more of a macro level versus neuroscience, where we're looking things at a micro level, how things work structurally and functionally and anatomically. Okay, so when we get into evolutionary biology, smiling and facial expression has actually been studied quite a bit in our ape cousins. And though there are distinctions between different species of monkeys and apes, some facial features are actually strikingly similar between us and between the different species. So a lot of studies have been done in this little fella, a species called macaques, I think. They're a genus of primates. And for some reason, they are particularly expressive. And so that makes them very easy to study. So like our little friends, larger great apes that may be more closely related, like chimpanzees, will also have distinct facial expressions for very specific social situations. So it appears to be very context dependent, like aggression or anger or play or social bonding. And we'll use these in a very context dependent manner to specifically build relationships. So though it's hard to say exactly, people pin the evolution of smiling kind of anywhere between 16 million and 30 million years ago, which is a little bit hard to conceptualize, but in evolutionary time, that is very, very recent. Okay, so what are some of these facial features other than smiling that we see kind of across all cultures and even in our monkey cousins? I'm going to give you a list. I love lists. I'm going to give you a list of 6. So if you want to pause the video and guess 6 emotional facial expressions that are essentially the same across all cultures. So we got disgust, we got fear, we got joy, we have sadness, surprise, and anger. And so when we think of these 6, we can think of very primal but very important social elements that we can use to communicate even before we have a very developed language system, but we can use our faces to communicate so much information. There's about 1 million studies diving into each one of these specifically and the muscle activation and the neural systems behind it, and I would love to, but today we're going to focus just on smiling. We see that smiling and facial expression, especially the kind of the open mouth facial expression with the smile, so you have pulling back of the zygomaticus major muscles and you have contraction of the orbicularis oculi muscles, are some of the most conserved features across both the cultural and evolutionary space. So we kind of get anthropological evidence here and evolutionary biology evidence, which in my opinion is super cool. We actually see that more closely related ape species like chimpanzees, so from which we diverged relatively later evolutionarily, have greater activation patterns of those muscles. So we see that these features are even relatively newer when we have more intense facial reactions. And just speculating here, I really think that has to do with the social development, and what makes humans kind of different is that we have learned to read faces very well and express faces very well, and that helps so much with communication and social building. Okay, so before we move on to the last section, I have a couple more things to say. There do, however, exist differences between smiling faces, and this list might seem obvious. I'm going to give you another list of 6 people, but there are a bunch of small factors that will differ between individuals, and that may change exactly how our smile looks. So again, if you want to pause and guess, I'm going to give you a list of 6. So we have anatomical variation, so exactly how the muscles are attaching to our bones in our face. So that's one of them. Those will differ between people. Number 2 is neural innervation. So your nerves from the different motor areas in your brain will innervate your muscles in your face differently and will cause slightly different activation. So if you have nerves that have weakness or paralysis of some sort, that will change how your face looks. And even if you don't have those things, there might be slight differences between people. So we have sex differences is number 3. The muscle content of males versus females differ ever so slightly. And so when you see males might have stronger cheek or masticator muscles, it might make their smiles and their facial expressions look a little bit different. Then we have age differences. This comes down to face wrinkles and weaker facial muscles over time. And then we have neurobiological differences is number 5, how different brain areas will respond to different emotional stimuli and produce different responses. And then we have cultural differences, obviously, that, in some places smiling might be more valued versus in other countries, smiling might be a little taboo, and smiling should be very restricted. I'm gonna give you 2 last little facts. So producing expression, reading facial expression, and recognizing faces are actually all 3 different neural systems. So in certain disease states, like Parkinson's, people will often actually lose the ability to produce strong facial expressions. In other conditions, like autism spectrum disorder, people may have a very hard time reading facial expressions, which is an interesting phenomenon in and of itself, socially and evolutionarily. And then fact number 2, people have found that neural systems that produce natural emotional responses in the face are actually distinct from your regular voluntary motor system. So usually you have a motor system that says, hey, I want to move my hand, I'm going to move my hand. But if those systems are broken, and you might have paralysis of your arm or your body or facial muscles, you actually have different brain systems coming from different areas kind of in the prefrontal cortex that will regulate emotional responses. And that, I think, just goes to show how important these responses actually are for social communication, to the point where they have their own distinct neural systems. And so you can also look at those systems producing real smiles and other systems producing what we see as the fake smiles. I mean, that'd be a really good sci-fi movie. Find a way to target the voluntary systems and just lesion them, so that the only way people could show emotion is actually through these more primal and naturalistic responses. And we could just wean out all the fake smiles. Now I'm going to teach you guys how to hack your own happiness. We're going to talk a little bit about the facial feedback hypothesis, which is essentially the idea that facial movements and activation of muscles in your face will feed back onto your neural systems and produce emotions associated with those facial patterns. And so intuitively, I think it makes sense that if you're happy, it's going to make you smile. If you're angry, you're going to kind of have this crunched up, furrowed brow face, But the facial feedback hypothesis is suggesting that communication actually goes two ways. So this idea kind of dates back to the late 1800s, developed by two psychologists, William James and Carl Lange. God, I filmed that like 4 times. Okay, look at William. He is a chiller. Anyways, these two proposed that emotions actually start in the body as physiological reactions to an external stimuli. So instead of being produced by the brain and then we feel the emotions, it's more produced by the body and then we feel those emotions and then we conceptualize them in our heads. So the opposing theory, the OPS, the Cannon-Bard theory, suggests that external events actually trigger physiological and emotional reactions simultaneously, and these things are conceptualized. And so here's a little diagram, just differentiating the two. And so without going into much detail, people understood quite early on in physiological research that the body actually can affect your head, which is weird to think from a philosophical standpoint that, we kind of tend to picture ourselves as being in our heads or our existence or the self being independent from the body. But what these people have shown is that our bodies actually have significant effects on how we perceive the self, and following that, how the self perceives the outside world. So for a long time, the facial feedback hypothesis has been somewhat contested. There's been a lot of studies looking at it, and some of them are not very well done. And everyone kind of uses different measures, which makes it hard to kind of analyze whether or not these studies are fair and replicable. So a recent meta-analysis, basically a paper that looks at all the studies in a given subject, they looked at 138 studies on facial feedback hypothesis, concluded that, in fact, there is a consistent effect of facial expression on emotion. And so one of the big questions of this field is, does facial expression start or just modulate emotions? And this meta-analysis kind of concluded that it does both. So it can not only respond to external stimuli to strengthen the emotions that we're feeling about something. So if we see something that makes us smile and we smile in a response to it, it's going to feed back and increase those feelings of joy. But it also is able to start emotions of joy, in which when you can make yourself smile, a real genuine smile, by activating, again, those muscles there, it will put you in a state of positive affect, of happy feelings. One of the original studies in this field, it's a little silly and it's been contested a bit, but one of the first studies in this field made people watch cartoons with a pen in their mouth. And so people either put a pen in their mouth this way or this way, and I'll just demonstrate that. Okay? Or good. And so they were instructed to just keep the pen in your mouth and watch cartoons. And then afterwards, they rated the cartoons on how funny it was and how positively emotionally aroused it was. And the study found that people who held the pen in their mouth sideways, right, in a state where you kind of have activation of the zygomatics major and the orbicularis oculi, as you might guess, felt more positive emotions and found the cartoons funnier, which is really interesting to me. That the same cartoons watched by two different groups of people are objectively funnier just because of the facial expressions, or subjectively funnier, I guess, but just because of the facial expressions someone can make. On top of producing good emotions, we've also learned that smiling can help regulate negative emotions. And so there's, over the past few decades, there's been some studies putting people in negative situations and then inducing smiles after. And we see consistently that genuine, real smiles, so again, the same muscle activation, help regulate negative emotion and kind of bring people back to a neutral emotional state. And so not only can smiles bring us from a neutral state to a positive state, they also help regulate negative emotions, which for a bunch of different reasons can be very helpful in different social contexts, or even just for yourself. Smiling is a mediator of your emotions. The last thing I want to talk about today is how contagious smiling is. And I think this is really important because this is really the social aspect of smiling and facial expression, really, that we're starting to unpack with study designs using fMRI, so functional magnetic resonance imaging. And so basically we put people under a brain scanner and we look at their brain during certain tasks. And so this one really cool study put people in an fMRI machine and presented them with either happy, sad, or neutral faces. And they were instructed to either smile, frown, or keep a neutral face in response to these images. And so what the study found actually is that when the response was dissonant, so when a happy face was shown and they were instructed to frown, versus when the response is congruent, so a happy face and they were instructed to smile, the congruent responses were significantly faster, indicating that those responses were more were likely involuntary. They were just natural reactions, versus the dissonant ones were longer. So people actually had to think through and even go against their natural reactions. And so, interestingly, they saw that dissonant reactions activated parts of the brain in the inferior frontal cortex and the somatomotor cortex here, so controlling the movement bilaterally. And what that really suggests is that the prefrontal cortex, you have to process that information before you actually produce a motor response, versus in the congruent conditions, so one where the reaction they were told to do is works well with the image that they were presented. We actually, particularly actually when seeing a happy face, we see activation of the medial basotemporal lobes, so the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the parahippocampal region, which are all associated with emotional responses, as well as memory formation. So the study really hypothesized that the region that facilitates congruent facial movements, so reactions in response to something outside, are actually independent of these non-volitional, so non-voluntary movements. And so our brains actually know immediately how to respond, and to change that response is extra work for your brain. And so to me, what this implies is when you smile, when you go out and smile at someone on the street or your friend or your family, the natural response of their brain should be to smile back. And so if you, by choice, can make someone else smile, I think that is a beautiful and powerful thing. And it happens outside of your conscious reality, but you can help people feel happier and genuinely make the world a happier place for other people just by choosing to smile. And that's beautiful to me. All right, guys, that's it for today. So today we talked about how to spot a fake smile versus a real smile. We talked a little bit about the evolutionary biology of smiling and the cross-cultural differences and similarities. And finally, we talked about the facial feedback hypothesis, in which smiling can affect how you feel. So I want to leave you guys with this. You have the ability to change how you feel to some degree. And you also have the ability to change how other people, you have a very strong effect on how other people live and see the world. and don't go at like trying to manipulate people, but you have the ability to make someone's day simply by changing the shape of your face. And I think that is very, very powerful. If you guys want to know more about smiling or about facial expression research, all these studies that I used are going to be down in the description below. Please go check them out. And if you're interested again in evolutionary biology and kind of the history of humanity and kind of want to get yourself in this headspace, Sapiens is a phenomenal book. As always, thank you for joining me. I have been Nick from Synapes. Keep smiling and keep monkeying around. Peace. Hey everyone, this is Postscript Nick. Thanks again for joining me today. This is my first full-length video. I'm really just learning how to film, edit, craft my videos to be able to produce something that's both informative and entertaining. As I continue to grow this channel, I would love to hear more about what people are interested in, exploring, and how in-depth people want me to go. One thing I noticed in this video is that each one of the papers that I read had maybe hours worth of information to talk about, and I could have gone on and on in each section. So I'm just trying to figure out a good balance of informative but entertaining without really yapping too much or diluting the scientific information too much. And so I just want to say thank you for sticking around. Thank you for working with me through this journey. If you want to subscribe and leave a comment, constructive criticism is very much appreciated. My background is awful. I'm a college, or I just graduated from university. So I'm working with what I have, and I appreciate you guys sticking around. So leave a comment. I am going to respond to everything. So yeah, keep monkeying around and stay curious.